I had said no numerous times, but after a while I just stopped saying anything at all. I don't think that had I said no 9 times versus the 8 times that I did, it would have made a difference, so I just stopped talking. And that could technically be used against me without this affirmative consent bill.
The California bill is unique because it requires an affirmative, conscious, and voluntary agreement before students have sex. The legislation also says a lack of resistance or silence cannot be interpreted as a yes.
The call on college campuses seeking to end sexual assault has always been no means no. But this weekend, California Governor Jerry Brown changed the dynamic, announcing a new bill that would in effect dictate yes means yes. And it's being hailed as a major step forward in what one lawmaker calls the healing process. Let's welcome to MidPoint visiting criminal law scholar at the University of Houston Law Center, Melissa Hamilton joins us again on the show. Melissa, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Here's what I caught out of this. It says rather than using the refrain, no means no, the definition of consent under the bill requires, quote, an affirmative, unambiguous, and conscious decision, unquote, by each party to engage in sexual activity. Can you just give us an idea of what that changes in between no and then yes? Because I guarantee you when some people hear yes means yes, their eyebrows go up just a little bit and go, that doesn't sound quite right.
Yeah, so it's been a very interesting trajectory of rape law over the years, where it used to be that one had to, if one was going to be a legitimate victim of rape, they had to physically resist. And so the evolution has been then, instead of having to affirmatively say no, this is a progression in rape law, which is treat this as a transaction, which is make sure that you're getting affirmative consent. And affirmative consent, even though the law has been now described as yes means yes, requires some indication of a consent to sexual activity.
So then we're not talking about verbal, but there literally would have to be something along the lines of, do you want to have sex? Yes, I do want to have sex. It would have to be something along that line that would have to be between the two and at least very obvious, correct?
That is, and the ideal is that there would be a verbal exchange, but again, the law ended up not requiring the verbal, so that we're used to in the law looking at areas where it requires consent, where it's not necessarily verbal. So nonverbal activities such as leaning in or being the one who is the aggressor could be considered consent as well.
Is the biggest part of this bill I read that silence or lack of resistance doesn't imply a green light, and that drunkenness is not an acceptable defense? Isn't it almost like the time is well past? That should have been in the law a long time ago.
I would have thought so. This is one of the areas where the law lags behind social norms. So in terms of this, the consent, can be nonverbal, as I indicated, at least in terms of this law. We should, I think, this is a transaction. Now, this is a different type of transaction than normal because we always will feel that sexual activity is different. But it is a transaction between two consenting individuals. So this kind of raises the bar, at least with respect to college campuses, on putting on actually both people of making reasonable efforts, as I think what the particular law requires, that the other person is affirmatively and voluntarily consenting to this activity.
I only got about 20 seconds left, but isn't it fair to say that we are still in an era, he said, she said, is always going to be difficult to prove?
Absolutely, because sexual activity usually occurs in private.
Exactly, and that's going to be something that the law is in, as you say, catching up eventually. That's something else that's going to happen down the road, but this is at least such a proper step forward in order to take to try and stamp this down on colleges.
I agree.
Absolutely. Melissa Hamilton, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure. We'll talk again.
Thank you.
All right, next hour on MidPoint, the reaction to illegal immigrants not only being allowed to join the American military, but being sought after with a diminishing pool of legal applicants. And after the break, News Call goes to Oklahoma for the latest on a brutal crime that has forced people to consider what is and what is not an act of terrorism, despite what some people may say. That's coming up next, right here on MidPoint, where every day we question everything.